Thanks very much, James, for the kind introduction. Great to see so many of you here this morning. Today, of course, is not any general mourning. We, of course, pause to mourn the thousands of lives that were lost on September 11th in 2001, and also to commemorate the firefighters and the police and the emergency medical workers and so many others who rushed into harm's way to try to keep New Yorkers and Virginians safe. Their heroic sacrifices will never be forgotten. Here at the FCC, the 16th anniversary of the September 11th attacks is a reminder that we must do all that we can to make sure that our emergency communication system is reliable and that it can improve. As it happens, September is also National Preparedness Month, and so there's no better time to recognize, I think, that effective communications can be the difference between life and death. Whether emergency personnel are responding to a hurricane or an earthquake or a tornado or a fire or some other sort of disaster. Now, we have made significant headway over the last 16 years since that clear Tuesday morning in September. But I think there's much more to be done to improve our emergency communications system. And at the core of that system, of course, as you know, is 911. When Americans call 911, they expect to go through, the call to go through, and they should. Every call that is placed to 911 should reach emergency responders. But on March 8th of this year, we were reminded that that isn't always the case. And that was when one of the nation's largest wireless providers experienced a nationwide 911 outage. Now, the FCC is working with stakeholders to learn what the causes of that outage were and what some of the impacts were. And to also understand from stakeholders what the past 911 outages, whether caused by natural disasters or man-made errors, can teach us in order to help us prevent similar outages in the future. We also have to ensure that when 911 outages do occur, that emergency responders and the public are promptly notified so they can take the appropriate action and get the information they need to people who need it. Now, after the March 911 outage, I directed our terrific Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, represented up here to my right, to investigate the causes and impacts of that outage. And as part of its investigation, the Bureau sought input from many different stakeholders, including, I think, many of you from the public safety community. We asked people what they experienced during the outage, including how they were informed and how they, in turn, tried to inform the public that was relying on them about alternative ways to get help. We received a lot of valuable input, much of which I've been briefed upon, and we thank you, those of you who submitted that input, for your feedback. And this workshop builds on that important conversation that happened earlier this year. And we have the expertise in this room from the private sector, from state and local governments, and from other public safety officials to meaningfully improve situational awareness during 911 outages. And the professionals arrayed around the table today who are participating in today's roundtables have joined us from as far away as Colorado, as I understand it. Now, they represent the diverse interests that can and must work together to ensure that we have a reliable emergency communication system. And so thank you all for taking time away from your jobs and your families to be here today. Now, this exchange comes at a critical time, as Hurricanes Harvey and Irma illustrate. Last week, I went to Texas to inspect the damage that was caused by Harvey and to meet those who are engaged in recovery efforts. I heard firsthand from 911 call takers and emergency communications personnel about some of the efforts they made to keep people connected, even though they received 10 times the call volume and some of their own homes were flooded and they had to literally sleep in the call center. I visited broadcast stations like KPRC, where people kept the information on the air 24/7 without commercials, and they too, many of them, slept in the studios. Everyone, I think, went above and beyond to keep people safe in a moment of dire need. Now, when Texans' ability to call 911 became strained, many people turned to social media. Some public safety entities use social media to tell residents to call 911 only for life-threatening emergencies and to use 311 for other purposes. Now, these efforts yielded many success stories. For example, on social media, emergency responders asked residents who owned boats and high-water vehicles to contact fire officials to help with rescues in flooded neighborhoods. They were an adjunct, if you will, to the famous Cajun Navy that we have all come to know about. Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez tweeted during the disaster that a woman was going into labor, and he shared the address of her home. An hour later, he updated his followers that The woman had, in fact, been taken away by ambulance. And I personally heard about other cases like that in which online platforms were used to connect someone who needed help with someone who could provide it. But I think despite the value of social media in times like these, when a disaster strikes, our experience of Hurricane Harvey also shows that there's an importance of not confusing social media as a substitute for calling 911. During the disaster, for example, some public safety entities warned that social media was not the best means of communicating emergency rescue requests. And I heard in the Harris County Center, for example, that there's a lot of confusion over which hashtags people should be monitoring, which ones they should be using. Those aren't always standardized, of course, in a situation like that. All of this points to the need, I think, for best practices about how to communicate effectively, both about 911 outages and during those outages. Now, the hard work of rebuilding after Hurricane Harvey coincides with the ongoing havoc we see on our TVs wrought by Hurricane Irma. And these and other storms in the works, we're already talking about Jose and Katia, show that we can't let up on these public safety responsibilities. And that is why today's workshop is so important. Each of you has been chosen to share your expertise so that we can develop best practices, combine resources, and ultimately make improvements to the system that keep Americans, no matter where they are and what disasters or attacks they might face, stay safe. And I personally, again, would like to thank the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau for working with industry and government partners to support service continuity and to support restoration efforts before, during, and after these hurricanes. And in particular, our staff in the field. I had a chance to meet with some of the folks, various agencies, from FEMA to the Harris County 911 emergency director. All of them told me to a person that it was very valuable having the FCC staff, the eyes and ears on the ground, helping out and providing information. They represent, as I said earlier, or late last week, the very best in public service. I'd also like to thank the Bureau for hosting this workshop. And day in, day out, whether in the field or here in headquarters, our staff, represented by David and Nikki and James up here today, really do work every day to make the American people safer. I'd also like to recognize and thank the first responders and everyday citizens who have heroically stepped up to the plate during Hurricanes Harvey and Irma to help their fellow Americans. We hear a lot about the J.J. Watts and the Mattress Macks of the world, but there are many other stories out there, some of whom will never make it in the newspaper or on TV, who deserve credit for helping some of their fellow citizens when it would have been just as easy to go the other way. Just as we saw in the wake of the September 11th attacks, I think the worst in tragedies can often bring out the best in the American people. And that spirit of camaraderie in Texas and that we're seeing in Florida today, I think, is evidence of that. And all of these labors underscore a fundamental truth. When it comes to public safety, we are all in it together. And so thank you again for being here. And with that, I will turn it over to James, who I understand will go through some logistics, and then turn it over to you for the discussion without further ado. So thanks for your attention, and thank you, James, for leading us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate your remarks. And I noticed that we're also joined this morning by Commissioner Rosenworcel.